to Sacred Time. My name's Maurice. I apologize for the little bit of raspiness. I got a cold. It ain't the Rona, but it ain't fun either. Thankfully, I'm joined today with my co-host, as always, Dennis Kaminsky. How you doing today?
Bop!
He's doing bop today. But we're recording this episode, and we're going to plan to have it released on a special day. It's May the 4th, which, if for some reason you don't know, is a day to celebrate a representation to the Star Wars series, films, TV shows. If you're a fan of it, May the 4th is a special day for you. And in honor of that, we decided we wanted to have a podcast talking about what we ranked as like our favorite movies and our opinions. But we know everyone else is going to do that too. So we're going to have another conversation, this one regarding more directly. And I'll go ahead and just ask this question.
We're going to hook them? We're going to hook them before we get to the list?
Oh, yeah.
That's the plan?
So the question, obviously, with the films continuing series coming out now under the Disney brand, in your opinion, do you think that Disney is good for the Star Wars films in the series?
Before I answer that, I'm going to get a little bit more into why we're talking about it, because it's a great question, but I think that it's a very specific topic. And the reason we're having the conversation is because we remember having a conversation initially 10 years ago when the rights for Star Wars were sold from LucasArts, or when LucasArts as a company was purchased by Disney. And we had a conversation about what this is all going to look like. And it's really interesting because since then, we've seen a full film franchise and multiple other products. I think it's really easy to say that it has been a great purchase for Disney. Star Wars has definitely been good for Disney. Since they've bought Disney, they've released 5 films, multiple series. The Mandalorian single-handedly helped them make Disney Plus a success. They had 0 original content at all whatsoever, except the most streamed show. So, I mean, it kind of works itself out in that situation. But, yeah, so it's been very integral to Disney. Obviously, they've expanded. What's it called? Galaxy's Edge, the theme park over in Disney. That's been a huge attraction for them. All 3 of the Star Wars films, or the Skywalker Saga films, have been incredibly successful at the box office. Actually, Solo and Rogue One were also very successful. So I think it's pretty easy to say that Star Wars has been very good for Disney. But the reason we wanted to have this conversation is over the last few years, there's been a little bit of a divide in the fan base as to whether or not Disney has been beneficial or detrimental to the Star Wars brand as is. So that was my little bit of an intro. I guess I hate to throw it back right to you immediately like that, but I am interested in hearing, do you think yourself that Star Wars has been, I don't want to say better, do you think Disney has been good for Star Wars, like as a whole? Because like I said, they've had 5 very successful films, big launched series. Obviously their merchandise has been crazy over the last few years. They've signed a lot of really interesting deals on a lot of ends. So
yeah, no, that's a really good question, and
yeah, we came up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say this: I'm a little bit in the middle, but I will give a definite no, and my reasoning for that is because for what mattered most to me, the films, I don't think they did anything to enhance them, change them, or do something to make adding these 3 additional films worthwhile. Like seeing Force Awakens, immediately my first impression, my thoughts was like, hey, this is something brand new. We don't know where they're going to go with this. It was that excitement of new Star Wars content, new original content for them, and ended up being kind of what it started off to be was a rehashing of the story that we kind of already knew, told by different characters, but also done in a way to not pay homage to the past characters that were still present in the story. It was this weird disconnect that it was too in your face about the fact, hey, this is a new Star Wars story. And I think it forced that narrative by showing you these past elements that we recognized, we're familiar with, but not in the way that we actually see them. You didn't see Han Solo where we left off with Han Solo and Return of the Jedi. This was like the Han Solo character that you remember from the whole original arc itself. And so some of those elements, it's like after watching it and getting that initial excitement of like, hey, there's new Star Wars, I'm happy for that. I went back and I went, okay, well, it doesn't really look like anything's being done to enhance the series itself. I don't feel like this is something that I'm going to have that same excitement and wonder for that I had watching the prequels when I had that opportunity to.
So you feel like they got you when it started?
Yeah. No,
like right off the bat, you're like, oh no, this isn't a thing that I like. So you weren't a fan of Force Awakens when it came out?
When it first came out, first time I seen it, I was a fan.
You were excited. Okay, gotcha.
I was excited. I had all this hope, and for what they did, there was things that afterwards, like I had to ask myself, like in the movie watching it, I was excited for it. It was cool when certain moments happened, but then there was also this part of me that while watching it, that I was like, I don't know if this is what I expected or what I was hoping, but it's new, so I'm gonna take it. That quickly went away when I'm no longer in the theater, so there's no people cheering, going crazy when they see the Millennium Falcon or anything pop up on screen.
Gotcha.
That definitely aided in that experience. By myself, I didn't want to, but it was like just certain things that started to pick apart. Like, okay, none of these environments look cool or special because they're literally the same environment we've seen in the old series. There's like Jakku. What is the difference between that and Tatooine other than it doesn't have two suns?
Say that to somebody from Jakku, and I'm sure you're going to get a response.
I would, but I mean,
I think that's racist, Maurice.
Hey, I see dirt. I mean, I see sand. I think the only other place in the universe that has sand is Tatooine. I mean, there were so many people. I remember we were playing the Star Wars Battlefield game, and they added Jakku as a map, and we were playing with Dylan. And I remember when Dylan made the comment like, "Oh, it's like Tatooine," and I remember in my head, I'm like, "Oh no, it's the new film though." But he was 100% right. He's like, "Oh, we're in sand, same difference."
So wait a minute, are you saying Force Awakens is New Hope with a new title on it, like Jakku is a new Tatooine with the?
It's worse because it also is New Hope, but with none of the fun characters, or at least the characters. You see a spark with them. Like I remember leaving Force Awakens, like I'm so excited to see what happens with this Poe guy. He seems like a badass, this maverick. Let's see what he does. And at the end of the saga, I'm super disappointed with what happened with him. Not even mentioning Finn, like that's a whole nother thing. And
yeah, of course.
I will say I have a little bias to. I'm assuming we're going to see like Finn be this, Jedi prodigy or something, but. The twist was fine. I had no problem with that. It's just they also did nothing for him, and I thought his whole backstory was cool. Like this is a guy coming. He was in the Empire, and now he's on the Rebel side. So I'm thinking there's going to be a lot more play with that narrative, and it immediately died. And that's for a whole nother reasons. But short story, in terms of the films and in terms of like world building, storytelling, Disney hasn't done anything for the Star Wars films that I find to be beneficial, other than. If you're looking for more content, they're definitely going to give you that.
Interesting.
Besides that,
so
I don't.
At what point did you feel like you fell off with the Disney Star Wars? Because it sounds like you were fairly optimistic going in. Like I think most of people were, going into the whole project. But at what point did that, like, I guess the nostalgia kind of fade away, and the tint in the glasses started getting much more lifelike and less rosy? And you started realizing that you were looking at a Disney version of something that you loved. Because that's what it sounds like that was your issue with Disney's version of Star Wars, was it was very much empty, it sounds like.
Yeah. For many different reasons, I feel like most people will probably point, like you expand that, take that question and ask most people, they'll probably point to Last Jedi. And for me, I point to it more so because it still goes off of the point I was making about what they were doing with introducing these elements of episode 4, 5, and 6, going into these new series and like where you're picking off from. The characters that they use, like, sorry, I want to get my thought back together a little bit.
You want to get composed. The Star Wars, it's a very serious subject. We want to make sure that we're handling the subject properly.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, with Han Solo, with Luke, with Princess Leia, we saw these characters, we saw them go through their own individual journeys, and in my favorite one being Hans, because I mean he went through the general
Yeah.
storytelling method, the hero's journey of starting off being this dude who didn't care about the rebellion, didn't want to put his neck out there for anybody, to he's a general leading troops into the final battle against the Empire.
Yeah, a bit of
He's
a
one the,
redemption arc. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And so you in that story thinking like, okay, he's this different guy. He's going to be different as he gets older, of course, and he's with Leia now. They're going to have kids who are probably going to be Jedis or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get back to the sequel,
Force Awakens.
It's got Force Awakens, and it's mostly Force Awakens. Because spoiler alert, that's the last time you see him, sort of. It gets to the point where it's like, nah, he's kind of not too different from what you've seen in like not Revenge of the Sith. And New Hope, and what you got from him.
They went back on the character's development pretty early into Force Awakens.
Yeah, and they didn't. Like, I feel like if you're going to introduce these new characters, you're trying to start something new, but you're bringing in these old characters. The old characters probably should still, in some way or form, be the main thing. If you want to end it with them in some way and pass it on, I get why you have those characters there, but it was like they were just there so you could see them. There wasn't nothing critical in like who they were and what happened to them in the previous films that mattered in the new films. And especially in Last Jedi, you've seen that with Luke, where he's doing things that just totally are out of character for the character he was and what you saw him grow into going through New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Like he Return of the Jedi ends with him getting saved by his father and getting saved by Anakin, because instead of killing him when he had the opportunity to, he trusted in the hope and the light that was in him. He said he'd rather trust and believe in that, not literally said it, but he'd rather trust and believe in that than go to the dark side, kill his dad, rule with the Emperor, all that kind of stuff. And it paid off, right? So to be that guy, that optimistic guy that, you know, everyone's got light in him, you got to believe in that, to then go to, oh, this guy looks like he's gonna be trouble, I should go kill him. Like, what happened between then and that film that makes that make sense? It seems super forced, like they just wanted some edginess to Luke or something. They wanted, it made him look crazy rather than he's being a hermit because he thinks that's the right thing for him to do. It's like, no, you just lost your fucking mind. You try to kill a kid.
That's not the Luke that you know. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So that was the part where I was like, yeah, I'm kind of out of it.
I agree. I think it's interesting that you pointed out Last Jedi. So I was interested in kind of hearing your general opinion on it, because I wanted to know if we were going to be super sour on Disney. To go back and answer the initial question before I follow up on your point, I don't think Disney has been great for Star Wars. It's hard to say that they've been bad for them, because it's definitely introduced it to a new audience of people. There are people who, I mean, have never really given a shit about it, who've completely fallen in love with it. Like I said, it's found a lot of success in theme parks. Look at the success of The Mandalorian on a streaming service that had no other interesting content at all whatsoever. People maintain their subscriptions just to finish it out. So I think that like there have been moments of really strong Star Wars, I guess, really positive attributes that Disney's been able to provide to the Star Wars franchise. Right. Another interesting one is, which is not a good one, I think. It's one of the things that I'm going to get to in a second, but they've also provided an unlimited fund to Star Wars. George Lucas doesn't have to go try to get $1 billion to get his films made, because they're on a regular basis dishing out $200 million for a Marvel project. So now you get to kind of diversify your portfolio a little bit. With that being said, though, overall, it feels like Disney has been more damaging to Star Wars than it has been beneficial. And that makes me really sad to say, because, I mean, Disney's where dreams come true. And everybody always dreamed about specifically what was going to happen in the Star Wars saga post what we saw initially. You know what I mean? Like, I think the prequels, one of the things that's really interesting that I wanted to bring up was they were very negatively received, right?
Yeah.
And to a degree, they created a little bit of a separation in the Star Wars fans, right? You had your purists and you had your prequel lovers, and it was usually a generational thing, right? Like I'm 25, or I'm sorry, whoa, I'm tripping. I'm 26 years old now. Oh my God. But I'm 26 years old, and when I was young, those were the Star Wars movies that was coming out. So I was going to the theater and seeing those. So my experience wasn't seeing New Hope in 1977 with my dad. It was going to going with my uncle to see Attack of the Clones. You know what I mean? When I was like 7 or 8 years old. So there's a soft spot for people like us. And that's generally the extent of the divide, right? There's very little hostility between people who absolutely love the originals and people who are really big fans of the prequels. There's a lot of really interesting, lively debates about the quality of the film. But since this franchise has come out, the divide has gotten much more violent. And I think that that's something that you can't ignore, right? Like there is a very violent subculture or a subset of people who absolutely despise everything that Star Wars was. And on the flip side, you have a subset of people who absolutely despise everything that Star Wars wants it to be. And there's like a fundamental ideological difference when it comes to how to present these stories and these characters and how to treat the mythology leading into obviously everything that they purchased. And I don't think that that's something you can ignore, because I don't really feel that with a lot of other fan bases. Do you know what I mean? Like there are a lot of very popular properties. Star Wars has probably always been the most popular like science fiction fantasy type property in the world, right? Like when you think about, you know, the Harry Potters and the Lord of the Rings and stuff, they're all very huge, but Star Wars has always felt like it's been at the very tippy top of that, right? So it's a larger group of people, I guess, to, you know, pull from, to have those arguments with, I suppose. But it really feels like this new trilogy did nothing but piss off people who have been Star Wars loyalists forever, right? And it's really interesting to me because I personally don't consider myself a loyalist, right? Like I like the Star Wars films quite a bit. I'm a huge film fan, and obviously Star Wars' role in film is, you know, you can't overlook something like that. Like it's one of the most influential films ever made. It did a lot for, you know, the technology of filmmaking, and it's an incredible film, and more importantly, in my opinion, it's an incredible achievement in film. But for a lot of people, the universe itself is something that they hold very near and dear to their heart. Right? Like a lot of people model what they do in life after the idea of the light and the force. And I mean, to some people that would sound a little bit ridiculous, but it's true. You know what I mean? Like when you're an optimistic kid growing up and these are the stories that you're consuming, it's almost biblical. You know what I mean? Like you model yourself after the Lukes and stuff. So I think to your point specifically, when you bring up Last Jedi, it's really fascinating to see a character like Luke, who's always represented everything that could be good in the universe, being presented in such a sour way. And I think that that's a fantastic example specifically to highlight where that divide, I think, really got dug in deep. Do you know what I mean? Because I feel like most people feel the same way about Force Awakens as you do. And I also think it's important to speak to, there's a very large group of people who absolutely love what Disney has done with Star Wars. And you can't entirely dismiss them, because at the end of the day, things can't stay the way that they were forever. And I do absolutely understand that. And we'll get to that in a second, I guess. I don't want to. But with that being said, I do think that there's a very fine line that you have to walk when you're developing a project like this. And I think a really good example would be, and I had a really good friend of mine bring this up to me one time. They compared Cobra Kai, what it is, I don't know if you've ever watched the show on Netflix, to what Star Wars should have been. And a really interesting thing in that franchise is the Cobra Kai series. Daniel LaRusso, which is the Karate Kid. It's Ralph Macchio. Yeah, Ralph Macchio, right? Oh, no. There's that cough you were talking about.
Oh, I thought I muted myself.
No, you didn't, you son of a bitch. Oh. But, are you nerf herder? That's what we'll do to keep it Star Wars.
Right.
But there's Daniel LaRusso's character is Ralph Macchio, right? Like he's
Right.
the Karate Kid himself. And when you watch the Karate Kid, he's kind of like Luke Skywalker is, almost like the way his character is. Like he's very naive almost. He's got like a kind of dumb face. Not trying to knock either of the actors, but it was just kind of a thing in film back then. Like, I don't know, that's a mean. But more importantly, like he is an optimist. Do you know what I mean? Like he is a representation of good, right? And they do a fantastic job in the series of having him still be that person while also still making mistakes and himself learning. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like with Luke, a lot of people were expecting maybe something more like that. So the version of Luke that they got, because it seems like Luke is a very sensitive subject when it comes to that divide in the Star Wars fans, the way he was represented in Last Jedi. And I think it's really interesting. I would consider you to be a casual Star Wars fan. Is that fair?
That's fair.
I think I've learned over the last few years, I am a casual Star Wars fan too, apparently, right? I've learned so much shit that I've never known from people. So like, I gotta, respect where I'm at on that hierarchy. Yep. But with that being said, you're a casual fan. And you're not trying to, you never said like, fuck Kathleen Kennedy and everything that woke bullshit Disney's done. You just went like, I kind of feel like they messed up on Luke because it feels like he wasn't the same guy that we left off with. And more importantly, you didn't touch on it, but I don't think they did a very good job of explaining how he became the version of himself that he is now.
Exactly.
So I guess if there was something in the story that would have covered that a little bit better, then most people would have been a little more accepting. But with that being said, it's tough, man, because, the benefit to Disney owning Star Wars is it's probably never going to go away that way. There is always going to be an incentive to create more content because it's always going to make a ton of money for the people making it. But I think that soullessness, unfortunately, is also part of the reason for me that Star Wars got really stagnant. It's the best way I can describe it, right? So I remember, like we talked back a little bit earlier in this conversation about when we found out Star Wars was being made by Disney now. I immediately got excited, right? Because it got bought, I believe, late 2012. So this is the same year that earlier the Avengers just came out.
Yep.
So to me, it's like, dude, if Star Wars can pull off taking characters and weaving them into each other's story for this big grand spectacle, how on earth could they mess up something like Star Wars? It's interesting because I felt very different going into Force Awakens because of Age of Ultron. Because me, that's where the Marvel stuff kind of started to get a little bit shaky, not to get too deep into that conversation, but I had my faith knocked down a little bit in Disney right before Force Awakens came out. So I feel like I was a little more open to seeing some of the criticisms that I wouldn't have initially. Because I felt the same way you did. As soon as that scroll hit and it said Luke Skywalker is missing or has gone missing or whatever exactly it is that it opens with, I felt so much joy in my heart. Do you know what I mean? I was so happy to be sitting in the theater watching another one. And by the end of it, and not in the way that I should have, I had way more questions than I had answers to. And the problem wasn't that I had more questions than answers, but I had a lot of questions, and the answers that I had weren't very complete answers. And that made me a little bit nervous. It made me feel like I was watching an incomplete movie, which obviously a lot of people would point to, well, it's a trilogy. You got to finish what happens. And I think that that's a fundamental difference between this newest trilogy, and we'll just go back to the original trilogy.
Yep.
If you've never seen a Star Wars film and you have no interest at all whatsoever in watching all 9 movies, or all 11 if you want to go with the Solos and the Rogue Ones of the world, I would suggest watching New Hope because it's a full film. The story ends if you want it to right there. It's very difficult to do that with the rest of the franchise. It's actually completely impossible to do that with the new franchise, and that's it. Because I think, to be honest, you could maybe watch Revenge of the Sith on its own and get enough of the story to actually matter. No disrespect to Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but they're definitely padded to extend the universe. And they're providing a lot of details that a lot of people consider incredibly important. But I think if you only could have made one, Revenge of the Sith would have probably have been the one. But to my point, like I pointed to an example in both of those trilogies, which you can maybe single out and get enough of the story that you needed. There is nothing at all like that. Because all the questions that you have in Force Awakens get more confusing in Last Jedi, and then you kind of get a half-assed answer to in Rise of Skywalkers. So in my opinion, in addition to Disney overproducing Star Wars content, because that was the next point that I was going to make, like I was ecstatic for Force Awakens, but I also was very disappointed when I left. And it wasn't like pure disappointment, but it was like, it felt unfulfilled. Do you know what I mean? Which some people would argue that that's a good feeling. I disagree when it comes to a film trilogy. I think if you've ever seen like Fellowship of the Ring, I want more, but I feel good after watching the first one. Like I feel like I justify, you know what I mean? Like I got enough to feel like if I would have stopped right there, I want to know more, but I'm all right. I can bow out right now. If you know, I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it makes perfect sense to me because all you're saying is there's a such thing as you having sequels to your films, and there
yeah,
may be a part of the film, a part of the story that continues on after what's just happened in the current film. But that doesn't mean that you still can't have some type of definitive end to
yeah,
what
there has to
exactly
exactly
happened.
every chapter has to end with something, right? Like
Exactly.
even within a film in itself, like each act, there's some sort of like there's something progressing it and moving it forward, and you should know more. The second act should be enhanced by the first act, right? Whereas in the Star Wars franchise, it feels like the second and third act are justifying the first act. And I think that that's the
Yeah.
fundamental issue with Disney Star Wars so far is I didn't feel like they started a story that made me care more about where these characters are going to go. I instead felt like it took 3 movies to answer some of the fundamental questions that they introduced in the initial movie, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I would akin it to there was a time where movies would end and they would end with a title card or an end card actually
Mm.
saying such and such will return
Yeah,
in
like
the
in the
next
Marvel
one,
movies. Yeah.
right? And then you also have those endings where it says to be continued. The to be continued, I get with a TV series because it's
Mm.
multiple episodes. This is an episodic trilogy, but that to be continued to me means like, yes, things are not finished here, and we're going to continue this into the next film. But it's almost still saying like it's not finished because there's still so much more. Like you started this film, you're going to have to see the next part to
Mm.
actually get some ending to it. And when it's like that, you just you end up in a bad place because the parts that really suffer from it, in my opinion, is usually always the characters themselves
Yeah.
because they get through all this shit, all this muck, everything, and then by the end of it, you're still just wondering, well, did anything change? Did anything actually get resolved? Oh, it's not. I got to see the next one. Well, that in itself, like you said, you can't watch that movie by itself because it's not. I'm not. It's not completed, but it's not finished. The story's not
You
definitive
leave
enough for
with a
you
lot of
to.
questions. It
Yes.
specifically is designed like there's a lot of vague information presented to you, and I don't want to dig into issues with J.J. Abrams as a creator, but I've watched his TED talk and he speaks a lot about the idea of mystery. And
Yeah.
sometimes you see it in his projects, they suffer from he does such a good job creating a mystery that he sometimes makes it such a good mystery that he probably doesn't even actually have a resolution to that mystery himself or an answer to that mystery, right? Like he
Right.
writes these dope ass riddles, but there's not really an answer to them. Do you know what I mean? And I think that I mean a lot of people you point to Lost, that would be the most obvious example. Like it's a fantastic concept and it kind of grips you, and obviously people like to knock on the fact that he can't really stick the landing, but I think he does too complicated of a flip, if that makes sense. You know
No.
what I
Yeah.
mean? I think he could stick the landing, but I think sometimes he try and it's ambition, man. Like I'm not going to knock that, right? Like I don't want this to be a strictly let's shit on everything that Disney did because
No.
I will say to Force Awakens credit a little bit, it had the most impossible job in the history of film. It had to please the fan base who was dissatisfied with the prequel series while also not being unoriginal enough. Like it had to have some distinguishing factors.
Right.
And it had not a ton, but it had enough to kind of make it stand out a little bit on its own, right? Like I said, most people, I think, were cautiously optimistic going into Last Jedi. Even if you weren't a huge fan of how big of a retread it was, I think the biggest concern I heard going into Last Jedi from most people who didn't love Force Awakens was they thought it was going to be too much like Empire Strikes Back. Like their concern was, oh, we're just going to redo the trilogy verbatim. And, hey, at least they went in an original direction, I guess, with Last Jedi,
Yeah.
right? Like that's I guess the counter argument to something like that. But it's just interesting to me. I have a few statistics I want to show real quick, which I think are really interesting in aiding this conversation about whether or not Disney has been good for Star Wars specifically. So just for point of reference, we mentioned that we both felt like the most recent trilogy was very incomplete, right? Like it
Yep.
felt rushed almost. Interesting to note, New Hope was released in 1977 and Return of the Jedi was released in 1983. So there were 6 years between the beginning and the end of the trilogy. Same amount of time went by with the prequel series, Phantom Menace in 99, Revenge of the Sith in 2005. Interestingly enough, Force Awakens in 2015, Rise of Skywalker 2019, so there was only 4 years between all three films. But crammed in between each of those off years was Rogue One and Solo, a Star Wars story, which I only remember the name of the title too because I got a hat on my head right now. I would just call it the Solo movie.
Yeah.
But also, with a little bit of numbers to back up some of the things that we're talking about, the box office numbers are the strongest for the Disney movies, right? The 3 highest grossing films in the Star Wars franchise are Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker. Although it is interesting to note that each film made a little bit less than the first one did. So they definitely capitalized on that initial intrigue, but as you said, they failed to retain everybody, which is an interesting thing. Then it goes Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith, New Hope, and the 3 least profitable, or I mean, it's hard to say least profitable when you're talking about Star Wars because they all made a shit ton of money. But the 3 least profitable Star Wars films were Attack of the Clones, Return of the Jedi, and Empire Strikes Back, which is interesting because that's usually considered to be the highest of critical acclaim.
Right.
Before we get too far, when you take those numbers and you adjust them for inflation, the highest grossing films in the Star Wars franchise are A New Hope, Force Awakens, and Empire Strikes Back, which is interesting that it's the least successful, but adjusted for inflation, it's the 3rd most successful. Right. The middle 3 are Return of the Jedi, Phantom Menace, and Last Jedi. And the 3 least, when you adjust those numbers for inflation, are Revenge of the Sith, Rise of Skywalker, and Attack of the Clones. So when you don't adjust for inflation, the box office returns for Star Wars are incredible. And I think that bottom line is always what people are going to point to when they talk about why Disney has been very good for Star Wars. Because they took a $4 billion investment and paid it off by the second film. And they're just going to rake in money at this point now with the amusement park and the merchandising and the licensing to the video games and so on and so forth.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, if you're looking for Star Wars content, Disney is probably the best thing to happen to Star Wars. And you made a very good point that
depends on how quality you want it to be based off of what we're saying.
Like I said, I said content. Nobody even mentioned
quality of content. That's true. If you want a lot of Star Wars content, I agree. Definitely best to at Disney. You want
everything Star Wars.
10 series in development on Disney Plus right now. Sorry, it was my last time interrupting you.
No. But you're pointing out every point that I'm making, which is just the fact that in terms of if you're a Star Wars fanatic, if you love everything Star Wars and you just want to be more engrossed into the fandom of it, it's great. But if you're looking at it from a quality standpoint or even a standpoint of because for me, I'll say for me, it was more so of following that story. And as a kid, yeah, a lot of it was just I was a fan. I thought it was cool. But once I got older and once I started actually, hearing folks talking about, man, Star Wars is just a good film. And I'm like, I mean, I thought it was a cool film, but it's kind of like just a sci-fi movie, isn't it? And I rewatched it as an adult. Then I go, oh, wait, I get exactly what they're talking about. This is cool. Growing up, I assumed Luke Skywalker's the main character and he has a lightsaber. Yeah, that's my favorite guy. Rewatched it. Oh, no, actually, it's Han Solo. I think he's fucking great. And I think what they do with that character is so cool. And so getting to this new point of content and films and stuff, it sucks that as much as we are getting more content, it's not, in my belief at least, doing enough to kind of build from where it was already at. It's not to say the first 3 is this pedestal that you got to reach to, and you don't reach that, you're not good. Yeah. It's just and
it's how you judge your Star Wars films. It's the original films. No matter what, you can't not compare it to them, right? If somebody made a spiritual sequel to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, even if it was nothing like it, and it was an incredible album in its own right, there's going to be a group of fans who are like, yeah, but you said that this is Dark Side of the Moon. This isn't Pink Floyd to me. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. This isn't the album that I was expecting. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't just... I don't want to project too much on it because some of these things I can't prove. But sometimes it feels to me that this new franchise is trying to disassociate itself with Star Wars, right? Like it's trying to push away a lot of the elements in the original film that it doesn't want to be associated with. And it's nothing like personal. It just seems like they kind of want to take it in their own direction. But they also want the legend of Luke Skywalker and Leia and Han Solo. And they want to take all of the big, pop culture references that people make and cram it into their stories to give people their shit. But then they're a lot more interested in creating their own version of it. Which, I mean, at the end of the day, when you own the rights, you have every right in the world to do. But like I said, there's a diehard fan base. And to me, man, the biggest example of that in the world is with Marvel, the benefit is you can make 5 films a year. It gets annoying, it gets repetitive, but you have thousands of characters to pull from in your catalog that have already been established, that have already been incorporated into a version of this universe within a story already. It was a little bit redundant, but within Star Wars, that was, the big drawback, right? Like, well, you got these 6 films. But the fan base had already been reading the expanded universe for years. And there were hundreds of novels. We frozen? Okay.
We're all set.
Hundreds of novels written, or I don't know if hundreds of, let's say dozens of novels written that George Lucas himself considered canon. And it's really interesting to just completely dismiss all of those stories and not even kind of look to them and try to pull from them. I was actually really surprised when they took Clone Wars and started incorporating it into some of the stuff that they're doing right now.
Yeah.
Because it felt to me like they were just kind of like, well, fuck everything that we don't have to follow. To be completely honest, I think if the original 6 weren't so popular, they would have tried to just redo it. But they knew that they weren't able to pull that off. And they almost did with Force Awakens. It's kind of a reboot of Star Wars at that point. Yeah. But it's just a really interesting concept to me to kind of see how they've handled the entire situation. It's disappointing. And I think as negative as it sounds like we're being, and to be honest, it is a little bit of negativity. And it sucks that I feel that way. But I don't like that I feel like that. I wanted to like those movies a lot. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, man. Like, I'm an easy mark for Star Wars. When I was a kid, I owned wrestlers and Star Wars toys. So if it were up to me, I would sit down and watch good Star Wars movies. I would watch mediocre Star Wars movies all day. And I feel like that's kind of what you got with the prequel series, is you got mediocre Star Wars movies. I don't think these were inherently bad movies. I think they got a lot of good filmmaking techniques in them. I think they have a fantastic cast. I think both of the directors are talented in their own right. You can say what you want about them, but J.J. Abrams has interesting projects, and Rian Johnson does as well. But with that being said, they feel like incomplete obligations. They're studio obligations. It feels like the cast's enthusiasm died out as the franchise pushed forward, and I think that that's a really big indication that even the people who were working on the films were kind of starting to lose track of what the story was. You know what I mean? Like, it seems pretty universal, but there is a subset of fans who will argue me to death, and you obviously have every right to feel that way. You're wrong, but
I mean, hey, it's always subjective, but I want one thing that I'll quickly point out that's very objective is the fact that with these new movies, if there's anything that I wish that could be different, like if you said, okay, they're going to do these movies, what's the one thing you wish would be different? Consistency at director. Like, to do the Abrams.
You think a uniform director would have helped it a lot?
Or at least
I agree. Rian Johnson did kind of throw him off the path quite a bit. They gave him a lot of creative freedom, it felt like. They gave him an opportunity to tell his own story.
Wasn't it the case that, like, they weren't happy? I thought there was some issue that when Rian Johnson came in, it was that idea that they wanted him to kind of do that. And then they went back with JJ anyway. Or was that originally always the plan to have?
No, the original director, I believe, was Gareth Edwards was supposed to do episode 9.
Yeah, something happened. I remember that because I remember it wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. So I guess the issue is you start off with these ideas in the first one with Force Awakens that get flipped upside down on Last Jedi, and then somehow sort of gets brought back in Rise of Skywalker a bit. Like not everything, but like the Snoke thing, for instance, got killed off in the second movie, and something like that I would have been cool with if done to some sort of effectiveness. But then,
before you get too deep into that, I'm
yeah.
going to actually take this as an opportunity to transition to our last segment, because
That's
I can
fair,
see
yeah.
it. You're
We're
dying
really
to jump
going
into
to
the
it.
movies and pick them apart one by one. So we're going to end today's show here on Sacred Time. We're both big Star Wars fans, and in honor of May the 4th, we are going to take a little bit of time out of our day to definitively rank 1 through 9 our favorite Star Wars films in what they now call the Skywalker saga. So these are all the Star Wars films with episode in the title. So,
Yes.
Maurice, I'm going to let you start it off. We're going to go top to bottom, correct?
Yeah, we'll do it that
Okay,
way.
so what is your number one Star Wars film?
Number one for me is Empire Strikes Back. It's
I agree
kinda
completely.
I don't know, you use the word quintessential. I've heard it used a lot. I don't really know the meaning of it, but it's the it's the movie that most people point to when they talk about what's their favorite, what they think is the best, and not to just go off of merit of alone that, oh, everybody says this is the number one movie. For me, it's number one because it did what I wanted Last Jedi to do. It took these characters from where they left off in New Hope and expanded on each one, where you got to see a new version of them. Not something totally new that you didn't recognize them, but hey, here goes Han handling shit, saving Luke and shit, like that kind of stuff that like you maybe didn't quite expect out of him with how he was acting in New Hope. That was exciting to see in this new film. Going to when you finally get to meet Yoda and the scenes of him and Luke training together, and that whole sequence of Luke having that doubt in himself. He went from that farm boy who wanted to get off Tatooine, was willing to join the Empire just to get off that planet, finally gets there, realizes the situation he's in, and because he's not confident in himself that he's going to get there, there's this back and forth struggle that culminates in some surprises you find out in the film. That it was just great. It was so fun. It was I guess for me, like I said, it's the most memorable because of the fact that you had all these different sequences going on. Luke being by himself for the majority of the film, outside of with Yoda, and then meeting up with everybody, most everybody by the end.
Yeah, I agree.
But everybody has their part that by the end of the film you want more, but it's very satisfying to see like, oh, well, this is where we're going with these stories. These are where these characters are going. It's something totally different from what we expected, but it was very engrossing. It's the best way I could describe it. So that's for me why it's number one.
Yeah, I agree. Empire is the best film in the franchise to me. I think it's the most well-made film, which is ironic considering it's the first time George passed the baton off to another director. The gentleman who we give credit to for Empire Strikes Back is Irvin Kershner. So I know he's very popular amongst Star Wars fans, but besides the Star Wars thing, he's not really very well known. Yeah, it's an incredible film. It's by far my favorite in the entire franchise. I think it does a fantastic job. Like you said, it's easily one of the top 2 or 3 sequels ever made, right? Like it does exactly what a sequel is supposed to do. It takes everything that you had developed in the first film and it builds off of those themes, and it takes the characters and it presents new challenges. The characters in that film are my favorite. I don't love the Han and Leia getting caught off on the side traffic thing. I know that's not literally what it is, but that's kind of what it felt like. It felt like, and like the Brady Bunch, how they give the one subplot to the people and they get caught. It's like the bottle episode where they're trapped in a setting with each other and they have to learn to deal with it. But yeah, it's got some of the most exciting action sequences in the entire franchise. It's got some of the most iconic moments. It does a fantastic job of taking all of that optimism at the end of New Hope and flipping it on its ass, and you feel like you're going in. To me, I'm a big wrestling fan. That was a quintessential wrestling build. You let the babyface get a little bit of momentum, the heel stuffed that comeback, and now he's got to go do his thing there in the third act. So I agree with you completely. What do you got at number 2? The film that I chose in this instance was A New Hope.
I got a little bit of a different one. My favorite, my number 2 is Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. Okay,
Yep.
well, I'll let you explain that in a second. To me, like I said earlier, A New Hope is the most complete film in the entire franchise. Like I said, if you were going to sit down and just watch one Star Wars film, this would obviously be the one to watch. You get everything about Star Wars you could possibly ask for. It's a really cool and simple story. I think it does a fantastic job of introducing characters. I also think something that it doesn't get enough credit for. I don't want to get negative, but I think with Leia, they botched her more as the franchise went on. But in A New Hope, she is one of the most badass female characters that has ever been there. She is completely independent. She doesn't got any time for anybody's bullshit at all whatsoever. She is focused and on top of her shit. She carries herself like royalty, but she's also incredibly intimidating. I think Carrie Fisher's performance in that movie is probably the best of her entire career. And I think that A New Hope as a whole it's a really easy, simple story. It's a little dated when you watch some of it. I understand if you've never watched a Star Wars movie before and you're starting in 2021, this looks a little low rent at the beginning, but there's some beautiful shots in that film that I think will kind of kill that off a little bit. And George Lucas put a bunch of bad CGI in it too, so it feels like a new movie, you know? Yeah. But you got Revenge of the Sith at 2. That's interesting. I guess I'll skip up and say I got that at number 4.
All right.
Why do you got that where you have it?
I have it at 2 for me because so like we were talking about growing up, we had the opportunity to watch the first 3 films, but we grew up with the prequels. Mm-hmm. And going through the prequels, the Revenge of the Sith, like I said, watching it as a kid, that was the big finale of it all. And the way that it went when, for some reason, maybe because I was too much of a kid at the time, I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Like, oh wait, Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader. Watching it happen, watching it see, like, once I realized that he was, obviously in the film when they say, like, that's his name, he'll be Darth Vader.
Yeah.
I realized what was going on and the changes that were happening. It, to me, made every other film during the prequels, like, so much more cooler, because it's like, oh, I've seen this change and I've seen this development into this.
Holy shit, that's been Vader the whole time.
Hey, like I said, I didn't.
No, that's good. That's an exciting moment
as a kid, but it was so exciting for me.
Yeah.
I remember being at recess and having all these conversations about, well, who would win in the battle, Yoda versus Anakin? Well, remember when they said his, gosh damn it, was it midichlorian count is off the charts, it's higher than Yoda's, and then we all that kind of crazy talk. But the big reason for me why it's still my number 2 is just because of the fact that it's one of the films where, for one, it's kind of like Empire Strikes Back in the fact the good guys didn't win at the end. There wasn't this big celebration of, oh, we did it,
I don't know.
We beat it.
If you consider cutting a guy up into a nugget.
I mean, there's that part.
He did have the high ground. That's a win in my book.
Hey, but that's another part. It had one of my favorite saber duels in all of Star Wars. Yeah. It was the best. It was the most likable. I don't want to shit on Hayden Christensen. I'm not shitting on him necessarily, but that was my favorite version of that character that he did in that movie. So for me, it's just always going to be my number 2. Like I can go back and watch it a lot.
I understand completely. So I got, like I said, New Hope at number 2. What is your number 3?
I actually have New Hope as number 3. And just to quickly go over that, it's mostly everything you already said, but I do want to put a little emphasis on the setting, because for me, that's why I still love that movie to this day. I can really, like, if you're not able to suspend your sense of reality to know that we're in this way different age of film where everything can look so clean and nice and pristine, and even the CGI is more realistic nowadays, that film still, like, you don't think you're on, oh, they're in some desert somewhere on Earth. Like,
oh, no, yeah, you feel like you're on Tatooine. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It was this new world that I was never really introduced to before watching those films. No, kind of it, I would say. So it just has, it's magical. It's so interesting to see that world and to think back how people must have seen that movie, watching it for the first time in 77 we said?
Yeah, 77.
77 and trying to wrap your head around like seeing these
Oh yeah.
spaceships flying through space over planets and all that stuff. That's all I'll say about that, but it's a good one, man.
No, yeah, I agree. It's a great film, and I didn't get to touch on it enough a little bit earlier. Star Wars has the best props and costume designs in the history of film.
Yep.
But my number 3 is Return of the Jedi. Probably the weakest of the original trilogy, and I understand where a lot of people's setbacks are. I tried initially. I'm not gonna lie. I had Revenge of the Sith at 3, just so I didn't look like I was biased towards the original trilogy. But I want to be honest with people. I love Revenge of the Sith 2. I think it's the best of the prequels. But I gotta stop. The originals, all 3 of them, are better than everything else Star Wars ever did to me. It's hard to say it, but I mean, I love Return of the Jedi. I love the Ewoks. I pop when I see them every single time. It's a fun, easy to watch movie. I don't think there's anything offensively bad in it. And the last 20 minutes of that movie are actually beautiful. They do an incredible job of wrapping up the entire trilogy, and it makes the entire thing having been worth sitting through. So we're going to move back to my number 4, which I said is Revenge of the Sith, and I'll not jump too deep into it because you've already covered it a little bit. But I think Revenge of the Sith is the descent into madness, man. It's the only movie I needed in the prequel trilogy. It's how we got Anakin converting into Vader. I don't think they did a great job of making me care about Anakin before that movie. But in that movie, I genuinely felt sad when he went to the dark side. So I think it does its job entirely. There's a lot of really good performances in that movie. Ewan McGregor is great. It's definitely Hayden Christensen's best of the 3. Let me see. We're going to move to your number 4 film. What do you have there?
Funny enough, we're just trading blows at this point.
Return of the Jedi?
4 is Return of the Jedi.
All right, quickly give me something on that. We're going to try to wrap this up in under 8 minutes.
Yep.
12 parsecs. Let's go.
For that film, it, like I said, it's well, actually, like you said, it was a great finish. I ended that film wanting to see so much more out of those characters, not for what's going to happen next with like this whole Empire thing, because they only accomplished destroying. They beat the Emperor, but the Empire's still out there, right? But it was more so about like where these characters were and where they finally ended at the end of the story. Leia, again, didn't do great with her, but Han and Luke both had me like, what is Luke going to do next after this? Is he going to become a Jedi Master? What's Han going to do after this? Is he going to still be a part of the Rebels? And
they gave Leia the Force in the end.
They
she
did.
Kept on with the good stuff.
Yeah.
That's what he said. All right, so number 6, what do you have at number 6? I'm sorry, we're at number 5, right?
Yes.
What do we have at number 5?
Number 5, I have... I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. Number 5, I have...
I'll say my number 5 then.
Yes,
my
please.
number 5 film is Phantom Menace.
Okay.
It gets really tough for me because the drop-off between the upper-tier Star Wars movies and the lower-tier Star Wars movies, to me, is very it's a very steep drop-off. Very quickly, I have it ranked higher than I have a lot of the other films because it was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw in theaters. So when I was a little kid, this was my introduction to the big screen and the film that defined the big screen. The Duel of Fates thing at the end is badass. I always had a thing for Darth Maul when I was a kid. I dressed up for him as Halloween, or I dressed up as him for Halloween twice. So it's entirely nostalgic. It's not a great film. The pod racing scene is exciting. The end scene, fight scene is really exciting. I don't really love the midi-chlorians thing, but pretty boring movie besides a few parts. But I feel like a lot of these movies start to struggle with this more towards the end. What do you have at number 5?
That's actually what I have at number 5. For some reason, I had a different list up, and I know for a fact what was shown on number 5 was not my number 5. But yeah, and again, same thing you were saying. The one thing I will add is having rewatched it, and I made this point before we started the podcast. I feel like Anakin could have been a little bit older in the film.
Okay. So you didn't like them focusing on him as a child? You said earlier that the thing with him and Padme weirded you out.
That was a big part of
Gotcha.
it. It was more to do with that age difference and yet the chemistry that was supposed to be forming that lasted to the rest of the series. That was weird, but then I guess more than that was like I don't know. I think you would have got a little bit more out of like a preteen more than like a child in some of the questions that were being introduced, like leaving his mother on the planet and whether it was good or bad. It's kind of like he was a kid. He was just told what to do. Whereas I think it would have been interesting to see more of a, hey, clearly this guy, as much as he's supposed to be the chosen one, he's got some different ideas on things that could be better understood coming from like a preteen or something.
Gonna cut you off and we're gonna move on. We got 5 minutes here.
Yep.
What do you got at number 6?
Number 6, I have The Force Awakens.
I have Force Awakens as well. I think it's the strongest of the trilogy because it's the least offensive. I thought there were genuinely some fun moments in the movie. I like Finn. I like Rey. I like Kylo Ren. I like Poe. I don't feel like it really gets anywhere, but at the same time, if I had to go back and rewatch any of the modern trilogy over again, it would definitely be Force Awakens.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah, that was an easy one. What do you got at number 7?
At number 7, I have Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker? Okay, that's where we definitely disagree. I got Attack of the Clones here at number 7. Why do you got Rise of Skywalker at number 7?
I have that at number 7 because kind of what I got for the last two. I guess for the last 3 films that we're talking, Rise of Skywalker, for my last 3, Rise of Skywalker, Attack of the Clones, and Last Jedi. I feel with Attack of the Clones and Last Jedi, those were 2 that I really just didn't care for much. They didn't do much for me. Rise of Skywalker at least has some cool scenes. It's kind of how I looked at it, so that's where it ended up at 7.
Yeah, I got Attack of the Clones 7, Last Jedi 8, Rise of Skywalker 9. I think I like the scene where they're in that gladiator type Coliseum. I thought that was a really interesting scene. I agree with you completely, though. I think Attack of the Clones is boring as hell. It's not an interesting movie to me at all whatsoever.
And I thought that was going to be the coolest because they had the clones, but...
Yeah, I agree completely. I was very underwhelmed. Even when I was a kid, I thought that movie was boring. I didn't like watching it. I would usually skip over it. Last Jedi I have at 8. I think that's where Star Wars got very derailed here in this modern trilogy. I think it's an ambitious project. I'll be optimistic and say it that way. I was not at all a fan. I appreciate that Rian Johnson wanted to put his own spin on it, but his spin made me dizzy and made my stomach hurt, so I wasn't a huge fan of his spin. And Rise of Skywalker is a shit movie. There is 0 redeeming qualities in that film to me at all whatsoever. I don't think there's a single part of that movie that made me excited. There was one scene when they killed Chewbacca, I got sad. It felt disrespectful, but I appreciated that they had the balls to, okay, I figured maybe this last one is going to get really dark really quick, and that's their way of redeeming things. And then they show you that he's not dead 5 seconds later. And I don't know, man. They just make so many mistakes in that movie. It was so underwhelming. It's edited horribly. It is an incomplete. Say what you will about Last Jedi. I don't really know what story they were trying to tell, but they kind of have a story.
Yeah. My last
Rise of Skywalker goes absolutely nowhere. They throw in a villain at the last second just for the hell of it because they realize they fucked up with Snoke, and Rey and Kylo kiss, and that made me uncomfortable because I viewed them like brother and sister. Finn got the shit end of the stick. And poor C-3PO and R2-D2, they were the true victims of the most recent franchise.
Yeah, like I said, I know we ain't got a lot of time. The one reason why Last Jedi is last for me was you got me where Finn wasn't going to be the guy in Force Awakens. And the second one, when I realized he really wasn't going to be the guy. And then you tease this whole casino thing, and that never played out. I guess that's a little mark on Rise of Skywalker, but... For me, it starts there. It's like, why don't even put it in there? We're not going to do something with this. So,
well, this is definitely a topic that we will later on in the podcast be revisiting in one way or another. This was a very thrown together Star Wars special for you 6 Star Wars fans that listen to the podcast. Thank you guys for listening. May the 4th be with you. I'm Dennis Kaminsky. He's Maurice Starr. If you want more things Sacred Time, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Sacred Time Pod. If you want to follow Maurice on Instagram and Twitter, you can do that at Big Blurred. And thank you for listening to the show. And I don't know. I'm not good at this part.
May the 4th would be with you. That's just wrote in.
May the 4th be with you. Don't get too drunk on the 5th either.
Oh, shit. It's Cinco de Mayo. I've never...